I'm an Academy member, so I get a onslaught of screeners and requests by publicists to see films. And one of the many that came by me was for a documentary called In the Company of Rose, directed by James Lapine. And I went, because not only is James Lapine the writer director of a couple of plays that I consider on my personal Mount Rushmore of greatest plays ever, which would be led off by Sunday in the Park with George, which I consider the theater equivalent of, it is to theater what Citizen Kane is to me for movies. And then another play I just love called March of the Falsettos. But I happened to be reading a book that had been highly recommended by a lot of people when we talk about what are great books about art and making art and creativity. So I got a book highly recommended by James Lapine called Putting It Together, how Stephen Sondheim and I created Sunday in the Park with George, which is, I just gobbled up. I mean, I just found it so fascinating. So I thought, hey, let's see if James is interested in coming in and talking about his documentary. But to me, much more interesting than just that is to talk about his creative process as somebody whose artistry I just admire in many mediums. And, I thought it'd be particularly interesting to talk about the transition from theater to filmmaking and specifically documentary filmmaking, although he initially went to what we call fictitious films with actors. So let me just kick it off, James. Just really honored to have you here with us. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. And let's kick it off by just talking about, how you even got into theater, because it's kind of an interesting story. And, ultimately we want to get to documentary filmmakers, but nobody like, I think, grows up saying, I want to be a documentary filmmaker. And they almost always come from like very interesting backgrounds, often in other arts. But you didn't particularly want to be in theater, did you, at the beginning?
No, but first, thank you for those kind remarks. Really, you put things out in the world and I don't ever know what happens to them in a way. So thank you, particularly the shout out for the book. No, I went to a small liberal arts college in the East, and then I came out to Cal Arts in LA at the very beginning stages of the college to study photography, which was something that really interested me. So my career, such as it is, has just been kind of drifting from one thing to the next, to be perfectly honest. The great thing about Cal Arts, particularly at that time, was sort of based on the Black Mountain College school of thinking, where you throw all kinds of artists together and let them interact with one another. And it gave me a kind of sense of freedom that I could not have to narrow in on what I wanted to do in life, but I could move from whatever interested me to something else that interested me. So that's, I always wanted to make a film. I always wanted to make a movie. That was kind of the photography I loved, but making a movie was something I always dreamed of doing, which didn't happen till I was well into my 30s. And actually, when I made the movie, it wasn't the joyous experience I thought it was going to be. So that's a whole other thing.
This is impromptu?
That's right. It's called Impromptu. I should start by saying that I am married to someone who made documentary films and loves documentary
Oh,
films.
who's that?
Her name's Sarah Kernigan.
Oh
She
yeah.
she's
Oh,
only made two documentaries, and she won
wait,
Oscar.
wasn't Marjo?
Marjo, and then she did a short called Thoth. And I keep saying, why don't you make more? And she says, well, I only make a documentary when I really feel I have a subject that I want to wildly be involved with. And so, but we do, she's been very active in the Academy in the documentary section. So watched, we watch an enormous number of documentaries in our household. So, but
So yeah.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, no, no. Keep going.
Well,
Sorry to
no,
interrupt you.
I'm often very bored with myself, so I'll try to make this. Uh, I went from photography. I had taken graphic design courses at Cal Arts, and when I came to New York, I really wanted to be a fine art photographer, which, talk about making a living is probably, very low on the list of ways to make a living. So I took freelance photography work and did photojournalism, and I really hated it. And so I kind of turned to the skills I learned in graphic design at Cal Arts. I was actually in the design department. And one of the gigs I ended up getting was designing a magazine for the Yale School of Drama. And so I did that for a year along with my other freelance work. And then I was offered a full-time position at the Yale School of Drama to teach design to the administration students, the people who are going to run theaters, to kind of teach them about programs and posters and advertising and all of that. The long and short is, by osmosis, I started learning a lot about the theater, and that's kind of where I moved into that field.
So you wound up directing a play at Yale, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
the then dean did this really interesting thing where he made all the students as well as professors and faculty uh, do something outside their area of expertise. So my design students said I should direct a play because I was really interested in very avant-garde theater at the time, which was not what the Yale School of Drama was about. So I directed I said, find me a play and I'll direct it. And they found this play called Photograph by Gertrude Stein. I thought, well, the title should be good. And it turned out to be 3 pages long. It was really just a poem. But I did an hour production of this poem using my own images and whatnot. And then uh, the woman who produced it, who was a stage manager, said, I think you should do it in New York. And I said, well, good luck with that. If you can arrange it, I'll do it. And a friend of mine, I was telling about it, and she was doing her doctoral dissertation on Jasper Johns, the great artist. And she said, Jasper Johns loves Gertrude Stein, and I think he has a foundation or something, write him a letter. So I wrote him a letter. He sent a check for $2,500, and off we were. Going to a loft in Soho before Soho was what Soho is. And another friend of mine said, what can I do to help? And I said, I don't know how you get people to review things. So she said, well, I'll see what I can do. And she called up the lead critic of the New York Times and convinced him, sweet talked him into coming and seeing this strange little show that I was doing. And he wrote a half-page rave review. And that's how I got into the theater.
wow.
So really a strange introduction.
Was that Frank Rich?
No, at the time it was a gentleman, Richard Eder, who I think
Right,
came to LA and became the book critic there. Yeah.
right. Yeah, why did they become book critics? A.O. Scott just left. He was one of the great film critics, just left to become a book critic again.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the few film critics who reviews documentaries and acknowledges there's a director actually directing them
That's always
rather than yeah, it's very refreshing. So I read somewhere that you did the play to kind of learn how to work with actors.
yeah. Well,
Um, um,
I mean, the actors were really just people I knew who were not actors. So I didn't really do the play any other reason than it just kind of came and got thrown in my lap and I did it. But I was really more interested in the visual avant-garde theater
Mm-hmm.
world than the conventional world.
You know, it just reminds me, I was talking to someone recently, a very successful documentary producer, Shane Boris, who was on here like a month or two ago. And we talked a lot about serendipity and the role of serendipity and breaking in to what we do. You know, so much of it is we sort of have this vague idea that we want to make films, and the path is always so circuitous, you know, and, you
I
know,
believe in that a lot, actually. I think particularly as we get older and have some experience, we tend to overthink things. But when you're young, you're basically stupid and you just kind of jump into the deep end sometimes and learn how to swim. And I think that's why I keep changing what I do and how I sort of got into making a couple documentaries, because it was something I had never done. And I think sometimes that's a great happenstance way to get involved in another art form.
yeah. I believe in being strategically stupid, you know, particularly when interviewing people, you know, like, you know, so what is it that you do? You know, knowing full well what they do, but, you know, or wait, we have to clear the rights for this photograph.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So when did you, what was 12 Dreams next? Was that the next
Oh,
play
after
you put on?
photograph, yes, I did a kind of workshop production of this. I'm at the time was very interested in Carl Jung and had read about a case study he had done about a little girl who had 12 dreams, and I was just so fascinated by it. That was my first kind of move into more something resembling conventional theater. But it took me several years to actually get that on the boards.
So
But
how, you know, I'm sorry, we're always fascinated by how things come into play. I think, well, first of all, I consider our discussion, you know, more about the art of making art than anything. So I'm always fascinated by not just the creative process, but how it comes into being, how we bring these creative ideas into fruition and put on a play, you know. I mean, the first one seemed like, let's go put on a play, and oh, let's just open it in New York and call a critic. But this was an intentional idea, and yet 12 Dreams is not a conventional idea for, you know, commercial theater.
yeah, but the dreams were, I mean, I'm not as much as I used to be, but very tied into my own dreams and writing down my dreams and trying to kind of connect to the unconscious that way. And what drew me to the 12 dreams were the 12 dreams, because I thought that was the fun of putting on the show. And the very first sort of workshop I did of it, it was sort of more visual heavy and more based on the dreams than the play part of it. And then slowly I came around to actually writing a real play and writing real characters around the idea.
Can you give people a brief summary of
Yeah,
what the story is?
yeah. Carl Jung had this conversation with another shrink that he knew, and the shrink asked him, you know, as the leading mind that he was, he gave Jung a copy of 12 Dreams, and he asked Jung if he would read the dreams and analyze them for him. So he came back, he gave them, and then, you know, I don't know what the time span was. He came back and met with Jung, and Jung said, "Oh, I think these are the dreams of a very old person." and went on to explain all the imagery and why he felt that. And he said, I think they are the dreams of a person approaching death, and gave his whole reasons. And it turned out that the guy who asked him to look at the dreams was had a 12-year-old daughter, and or a 10 or 12, and they were her dreams. And wow. So obviously when he was told that, you know, dramatically at such a moment, you know, when you find out that you know, he asked this giant of psychoanalysis and whatnot, psychology, and indeed his daughter did die 6 months after the fact. So I just was so kind of grabbed by that story all the way around that that's why I wanted to investigate. It's not unlike documentary filmmaking. You know, you find a subject that you want to know more and more and more about, and that's how I play.
It kind of reminds me of, I mean, it sounds so fascinating, and it's kind of one of the things that's always struck me about theater is, like, you know, with a great meal, you know, it just fades in the memory, you know, in a way, unlike film where you can go back and hopefully see it, you know. Does it frustrate you on some level that you put all this time and effort and work and energy into something that just sounds so remarkable and it's gone, you know? It just comes, it goes, and you move on.
I guess I never kind of knew how I was going to make a living and what my, you know, what profession I would actually settle into. So when I was young and I was unattached, and I never thought of the you know, making a living part of what I was doing until I wrote my second play, which was, well, can I write something that will actually make a, you know, possibly make some money? But no, I think, you know, I think I just want to do things that fascinate me and interest me, and some succeed and some don't. And I don't try to overthink things, tell you the truth. I just kind of go with my gut instincts. And sometimes you work on things and then they fade away and they don't hold interest after a while. And I've had some of those. And
well, it's different now that you're established, successful, accomplished all that, where your approach. But back in the early days, you know, what did you do between productions? Did you just write constantly? Were you?
I hate writing. I love having written, but I hate writing. I taught. I taught. After I left Yale, I decided to leave Yale, where I was teaching that one course and doing all the graphic design work. And I got a gig at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, which is part of the New York State system. A friend of mine had been teaching in the design school, and she was leaving, and got them to hire me, which, by the way, paid twice as much money as Yale, I might add. And the real catch here was they assigned you courses to teach, never bothering to ask you if you knew what the hell you were doing. And the first year I kind of got around it, you know, I was teaching basic graphic design I could teach, but then they asked me to teach window design, you know, for stores. And I thought, okay, we'll kind of wing this one. But the second year, they asked me to teach 3-point perspective drawing. And I was a bad teacher. What can I say? So for 2 years, until they fired me. And they actually literally fired me the day I was opening table settings off Broadway in my attempt to make a living as a playwright. So it all kind of worked out okay.
Serendipity. Julie, by the way, have you put in the link for the book, Putting It Together? Okay. Yeah, if you can just do that periodically. I really encourage people to get it, particularly at thrift books, not Amazon.
It's also out in paperback now too.
So yeah. I couldn't recommend it more highly. So I'm curious, when you were, writing these early plays and certainly somewhat experimental, even though you say with table settings, you were trying to get into a more commercial theater. Did the fact that you didn't go into theater, always wanting to be in theater kind of liberate you in a way? There was less ego attachment to it.
I think it's an advantage in some ways, watching all those people that came out of the Yale School of Drama who always wanted to do theater, who, from a young age. I think there's no generalization here, but I think coming with no knowledge was kind of very interesting, to find new ways of expressing things that I find as I've gotten older through the years, and now I have the experience, it's harder to access that kind of free imagination. So I don't know. I never really thought of things in terms of success or failure. I thought of them in terms of the experience and the joy of just making something.
Do you feel like you were more daring when you were young?
I smoked an enormous amount of pot, I may have had something to do with it. I don't know, I just enjoyed, I loved being a waiter, and I could have made my living as a waiter. I thought being a waiter was just fascinating. And, people say, how did you learn to do it? And I said, I was a waiter because I could drift in and out of people's lives. I could overhear their conversations. I ended up becoming a cater waiter, in New York, and ended up going to, incredible people's houses and very, very, very wealthy people, and being exposed to that. And you're great when you're a waiter. You're just standing on the side observing people and listening. But I really enjoyed that, actually. So I didn't mind doing kind of manually. I enjoyed that more than teaching, I'll tell you that. And you got fed, and paid, so why not, right?
I've had this side business of shooting weddings for well over 2 decades, and I feel the same way of like, what an amazing window into this
You go into
dramatic day into a couple's lives.
Filmmaking to some degree a little bit of that as well. The Rose movie was really just meeting somebody I didn't know and spending 5-6 years talking to them, and that's how that movie ended up being what it was. And I just brought my crappy camcorder with me, and I didn't even know it was going to be a movie for a while. I just thought, this person has got incredible stories and history, and it should be recorded. So it was more the reason I did it than to make a documentary.
Yeah. We will definitely get to In the Company of Rose. But I'm reminded, when I always wanted to be a fiction filmmaker, and
Oh, really?
I brought up Citizen Kane before. The minute I saw Citizen Kane at 17, it's like, okay, I know what I'm going to be doing. And it was always, I think one of the reasons why I never went down that path was I found it very intimidating to work with actors, the idea of working with actors, particularly once I got some experience as a camera person, and the whole idea was to make it seem like you're invisible, and not interfere at all with what people are doing. So I'm really, really intrigued by what you learned about working with actors, because I often make analogies that we do a similar thing as documentary filmmakers. We're trying to make our subjects, protagonists, as comfortable as possible with a camera pointed in their direction. I imagine directing actors is, particularly in film, is much like that, where in a very high pressured situation, you're trying to make these actors feel relaxed and comfortable and in the moment.
Well, once you you get a reputation, that's much easier, although not always easy. But at the beginning, I was completely at sea, and having absolutely no background, and also writing the plays I was directing, it was pretty nuts. And as always, there are some actors who are great and go with you and help you, and there are some actors who are just horribly insecure, or particularly I found with men my own age being challenged all the time. The biggest pains in the butt were guys that were like my age, because actors, want to be in the hands of someone they really can trust. That's the first important thing, is to let them know there's someone on the outside who's looking after them and their performance, so they don't have to worry about it. And I wasn't good at that at the beginning, but it's a process of just doing one thing and the next and the next, and learning from your mistakes and having more confidence. And I always knew what I wanted. I just didn't know how to get people to give me what I wanted in a way that they could also bring the best of themselves. It is tricky, and filmmaking is much harder, to my thinking, than doing it on stage, because stage, you always have the next day. You always have, until you open a show, you can switch things, throw things in air. But in a movie, when I did my first film, it was so stressful, because you have one day to shoot, three scenes, and that's it, and you're starting in the middle of your screenplay, and we had no rehearsal, and I had a nightmare leading ladies. So it did not exactly warm me to want to do another movie after that experience.
Well, you also, let me see, the cast was Judy Davis, Hugh Grant, Mandy Patinkin, and others.
Yeah.
Bernadette
They were
Peters.
great, because they were the only Americans and people I had worked with. So
Right.
I cast them, and thank God for them, because they knew I knew what I was doing, and they were incredibly supportive. But the Brit actors, it was tricky. And then my wife wrote it, so I've got her on the side. You know.
Well, how did you deal with actors who have very different acting styles, or maybe some like improvising and or rehearsing, others hate it? What, have
Yeah,
different needs?
well, that's an interesting question. I always do homework now. I always find out about people before I hire them. I call other directors they worked with, because I want to know what I'm up against. In this case, I didn't even have rehearsals, and I didn't even know this group of people, and it was in France in French, so I didn't speak French. It was like you could have made the list of all the difficulties I was faced with. And we had no playback, so I couldn't see anything. We just shot on film, and we were out in 2.5 hours out of Paris, which meant we couldn't get dailies back in a day. And it was, in retrospect, I realized, my God, I couldn't have written a harder scenario to pull off. It made me appreciate the theater, I'll tell you. But now I think, now I'm experienced. So I do think casting is so crucial. I would imagine in documentaries too, picking subjects that you think can really go the distance and have things to say that you have to draw out of them. I think if I ever had a profession to choose from, I'd like to, I love interviewing people. I love talking to people. And I think that's what drew me to the couple of documentaries I did, because I love that. I'd be Charlie Rose if I could, make a living just talking to people at a table. It's my idea of a good time. So,
Yeah. Again, I really want to get to that, but I kind of want to do a last thing about theater. I wish we could talk more about March of the Falsettos, because I love it so much. And I just discovered last night there's a very, very grainy video of it on YouTube. Yeah, so I can't wait to get back. I didn't have time to watch more than uh, four Jews in a room bitching, but my wife and I were talking about how we used to on long drives listen to the soundtrack of that. It's just such an amazing. Uh, it's not a score. It's a uh,
It's
you know,
unique, that show. And one reason it's unique, again, I'm sorry I keep coming back to documentaries, is that we came up, Bill Finn, the composer, lyricist, in a time where Andre Bishop, who ran this tiny theater in an old strip joint, um, said, "You two should meet. You should write a show. I'll give you the theater. I'll give you 2 months, and I'll give you the theater, and you can rehearse it and whatever, and then we'll put it on for an audience in 2 months." And that was it. We just went off and had 4 weeks to, out of nothing, make a show, and it was pretty great, because there wasn't it was just improvisational, and people don't make theater like that.
yeah. Well, what struck me at the time, and I look forward to seeing again, is like you work with pretty much a bare stage. It was a lot of. I remember those chairs on wheels moving in and out, and just such a clever use of props, and it just reinforced the idea that something very minimal could be extremely theatrical.
Yeah, it's more fun in a way, and the audience gets to paint the picture. But that came about because there was a kid in it, and I brought the kid in it. There were only 4 characters. I said, we really got to have a kid. We need to have some blah blah. And the kid who we hired liked to play chess, so I thought, great, I'll just have to let the character play chess, and then I just painted the floor red like a chessboard, and then I thought of, well, we'll just have furniture like moving chess pieces. And my set designer went down to the basement and just grabbed, chairs and whatnot. We put them on wheels, and boom, that was the concept.
You make it sound so simple. Uh, so let's get to collaboration. And the collaboration you're most known for is with the genius Stephen Sondheim. But you didn't know him well when you met. I love the story of how you guys met and started collaborating.
Yeah, no, I didn't know him at all. And another young producer who had done table settings worked with a very seasoned producer. And when we were looking to do another show, I want to do A Cool Million, which is based on the Nathaniel West novella. He suggested Stephen Sondheim, and I had only seen one Stephen Sondheim show, which was Sweeney Todd, which, by the way, I saw 3 times. I thought it was just an amazing collaboration. So that's how we met. We were introduced. The producer called Sondheim. Sondheim had come to see my 2 plays that I had done, and so he'd like to meet me. And I went over and to his house on a Saturday, and I suppose most people would have been very intimidated, but my knowledge of theater was, particularly commercial theater, so limited. I didn't really, I didn't have any sense of walking into a genius's or giant's house. And we just hit it off. The first thing he did was roll a joint, and we smoked it. So it was, we knew we were going to get along right then and there. Big pothead.
So I understand that the whole thing got kicked off. You showed a bunch of you smoked a joint and showed a bunch of photographs, and
Well,
that's where.
I gave him the Cool Million to read, and then I went off, and he read it and got back in a week or so and said, I've already done this show. It's called Candide, and so of course I didn't realize that or know that. And he said, but if you have any other ideas, let me know. And I said, well, maybe we could just get together and talk, and maybe something will come up. So when I went back to his house. I brought maybe 15 images with me. Some were photographs, some were historical images, whatever. And the last image I showed him was the painting of Sunday Afternoon on Le Grand Jatte, which was an image I used in the one play I had done, the first one, Photograph, was also in that. So that's how we, you know, I think he thought I was nuts. We were sitting on the floor with these images, and he's 20 years older than me, you know. I think he's saying, what the hell? You know, and but he didn't. He was game, you know. I just wanted him to respond. It was like being a shrink, you know, to the images, to see what he saw and what I saw and what was interesting about them. And so we looked at Le Grand Jatte painting, and he said, oh, it looks like a stage set, which it does. You know, I said, it does, but, you know, look at the perspective of everyone to everyone else. And there's a painting where there's, you know, 30, 40 people, but none of them are looking at each other. The perspective's all off, and, you know, it's pointillist. There's like 2,000, you know, paint drops on this. And we just talked, and he kept looking at it, looking at it, looking at it. And I said, you know, the main character's missing. And he went, who? And I said, the painter. And he went, oh. Because what was interesting about the painting was who made this thing, you know, and that became what was curious to us. So that's how we got that ball rolling.
Right, but I understand you didn't even do any research into the painter, learn about his
No,
life or any of that, right?
no. I first started just writing. I wrote 6 pages and brought it to him. They were so arty. I was so arty and pretentious. It was unbelievable. And he even said to me, he looked at the first 5 pages and said, this is pretty arty. And it was so funny. And then all of a sudden he like put his finger on like page 2 in the middle of a little dialogue. And he said, well, there's a song, I think it should be there. And I said, oh, okay, why? You know, he said, well, this is so arty. I think the best thing to do would be write a real musical theater song so the audience can relax and know they're not, you know, down in Worcester Street doing an off Broadway musical. So, and that's how we started. And then eventually we did do a great deal of research on the artist. But I wanted my sense of him to be from the painting and not be from the history of him. So I was writing a very obsessive compulsive guy who would, you know, decide to do an enormous painting with only 11 colors of paint and not mix them, you know, and so it became more and more fascinating the more and more once we started getting into the research too, to find that the impulse I had of the character was absolutely dead on to who this guy was, but to the nth degree that I had never imagined. I mean, he was such an eccentric. And I didn't know that he had died at 31 and that he had never sold a painting. I mean, here's a guy whose his work is in, you know, every museum that could afford to have his work in it. So we just lucked out. We picked a really good topic.
So I know he had seen a few of your productions, and he normally had worked with Harold Prince,
Right.
you know, who's a very well-known. Why do you think he chose to work with you, this kind of unknown, you know, guy he respected from your work? But what was?
Well, I think it's quite obvious. First of all, he was coming off a big flop. You know, he and Hal had done the show Merrily We Roll Along that closed in 2 weeks on Broadway. And so he was, when I met him, he was really dark and cynical and still licking his wounds from that. He said, I don't even know that I ever want to write another show. I'm really interested in computer games, and maybe I'll get that for a while. And he liked downtown stuff. That's how he'd seen my work. He enjoyed going to young people's work, stuff off and off Broadway. So I think called him a genius, and I think that's why one of his great genius moves was realizing he's 50 years old, he's already kind of done Broadway, and now people are comparing him to his other shows and whatnot. And I thought it was incredibly brave of him to take someone with no experience and work with him. Plus, he was very pedantic. He loved teaching. He was a teacher, so I think he really enjoyed teaching me about the craft of writing a musical. So it just kind of was very lucky for both of us.
So let's talk about collaborating with a genius. What was that process? You would write, and ultimately he would come up with songs, but not for quite a while,
Yeah,
right?
he always had one foot out the door. And at the time, I had a commission to write a show, so I had to do a show. So since I would come in every week with 3, 4, 5 pages of play, we would talk about them. He would talk where there might be music, but he never did anything or showed anything to me. So I just thought, and this is the way my mind works, oh, he's never going to do this. So I'll just use it as impulse to get this play written, because I had this commission and I had to show them something because they already gave me a couple $1,000. So that's where my mindset was. And I think he truly enjoyed being, we enjoyed being with each other and talking about it. So eventually he began to show me little nibbles of lyrics. And he'd come in and he'd say, well, there's a song here for her here. Would she say this? Or would she say this? It was like multiple choice. So I would say, I think the second one. Okay, why would she say that? And I'd explain why. And he'd go, okay. So then if she says that, would she say this or would she say that? You know, he's a great gamesman. And it was like being deposed by a great lawyer, you know, to get inside my head to figure out who I thought this character was. And that's how we moved forward. And finally, I finished the first act, and he had still not written a song, but he had written 5 musical chords, which he said, this is how I imagine the show would start, with these chords. And I'm going to base my score on these 5 chords. You know, we're not schooled in music. So I said to the guy who gave me the commission, you know, well, I have a first act, and do you want to have a reading of it? And he said, sure. You know, he was so excited to know I was working with Sondheim. And we go, I didn't tell him anything. We go to this rehearsal room, and there were about 10 people there. They bring in a piano, they put the piano down, and Sondheim gets up and he plays the 5 chords. And then we start reading the script, and the guy about halfway through goes, is there any other music in this? And I went, not yet. And we read through the play as what it was, and we would kind of read where our songs were going. And right after that, it was like he exploded and wrote he showed me the first song that he wrote. And it was the very first song in the show. And he told me to come sit next to him at the piano. And, you know, he did not have a light touch. He would go, I was like, and you know, he sang it, and he didn't have the world's greatest voice. And it was a woman's song, and it's down, and it was, you know, I didn't know what to make of it. So I just said, can you play it again? And I made him play it about 3 or 4 times, and kind of got an understanding. I was so nervous, and he was so nervous. But anyway, once we got past that opening song, then clearly he had been working all along and didn't really want to share it until then.
But he was still working on songs even as you were on, you know, getting ready for the Broadway.
I never finished the show. Yeah. And,
yeah.
I was so naive because I was just jumping into things, you know, and we did we did our little workshop down at this little theater, and it was 160, 150 seat theater. This is a guy who had only done shows in 1,000, 1,500 seat theaters. And he was having a ball. It was like he did the reverse of what most people now do, is start small, and then his first show was West Side Story. I mean, he jumped in at the top level, and sort of what I was doing. I didn't realize I was sort of mirroring this show as well. So it was great fun, and they wanted to move it to Broadway right away, and I didn't know Broadway, schmodway, and so, but then it became less fun because it was so stressful, really, really stressful after that. It wasn't two guys sort of playing in a room, and suddenly, we had to come up with the goods.
Yeah, that's why I recommend the book so highly. And Julie, if you could put the link up again in the chat, it's just goes into enormous detail about you interviewed what 40 people involved in the production, including some of those actors who did not like you very much at the
it was
time.
so interesting, and they all agreed to talk to me, which was really great, because I thought the people who couldn't stand me weren't going to cooperate, and they were the first ones to say, I guess I was a bit of an asshole, or whatever. It was kind of great. It was almost like, the world's best shrink session, going back 30 odd years and revisiting an important moment in your life that you're too young to have appreciated or really understood what was going on. And I learned a lot about myself. So
right. Well, you're also going back as a seriously accomplished director, writer now, as opposed to the young upstart that you were at the time, that they couldn't make heads or tails of.
The trajectory of that show was interesting because I had so little confidence from people, and the audiences didn't like it that were coming, because it wasn't a conventional Broadway show, and they had sold all these, tickets to fundraisers of people who were there just to give money to the Cancer Society, not so much just they wanted, a conventional musical. But the company and everyone, we did all come together by the end, in this incredible, magical way. That's why filmmaking, particularly narrative filmmaking, did not grab me, because you shoot this film and then everyone goes away, all the actors go away, everybody goes away, and you're stuck in a dark room with 4 million pieces of film to put together. And by the time the movie comes out, everyone you work with has already done 2 other movies, or worked on other things. It's quite I find it quite lonely. True. Whereas a documentary, I didn't feel that so much, because I felt my real relationship was with the editor, and having that relationship with the editor in the dark room, where you're both looking at footage and things, not performances. It's a great puzzle to work out together. So
when you're talking about the Sondheim collaboration, I was struck by how similar it is to the editor-director relationship in documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, definitely. And when you're doing a narrative film, then you're looking at performance, and you're searching for performance, and you're going, I'm pretty sure she said this, and and oh my God, I forgot to do that, and it becomes a whole different thing. But when you're telling a story in a documentary, it's so interesting to put that story together, and then put the images together, and it's a different intellectual challenge that I really enjoyed.
So, well, let's finally talk about documentary filmmaking in the Company of Rose. What, for those who don't know what the film is, first of all, why don't you explain, but also, what was it that made you think there was a film here? It's very much a conversation between you and Rose Styron, not unlike, in a way, My Dinner with Andre, or My Dinners.
Yeah, that was my inspiration.
Oh, really?
I didn't have any expectations. I really just brought this camcorder, stuck. I was new, so I thought, well, what am I going to do with this new camera I just for some reason bought? And I thought, well, I met Rose. I didn't know Rose, but I knew of her, and I met her, and she invited me to lunch.
By the way, this is Rose Styron, the widow
Rose
of
Styron
William.
is the widow of William Styron, who wrote Sophie's Choice and Nat Turner, Confessions of Nat Turner. And she, in her own right, they knew everybody, literally everybody, and from the Kennedys onward. And I am on this island, and from where I speak, Martha's Vineyard, which is like 30 square miles. It's very beautiful. And my wife's family, grandfather had a house here, and then her parents, and then we've taken it over. So that's how I ended up here. And we were not very social, but eventually I heard about her and eventually met her. And I didn't realize she invites everybody to lunch. I thought it was, oh, my, very special person she's inviting to lunch. I soon found out she just has to have somebody at her table at every meal. And, it was my turn. She had worked through the entire island, came up with me. So I brought the camera, and she didn't mind. And that's the film. And really, I so loved talking to her. And then right in the middle of our conversation, she, oh, I gotta leave. She got up and walked. I realized I'm just one tiny little hour and 15 minutes of a day that's probably 12 hours long. And she's that kind. But she's also, when I met her, she was like 88, she was not a youngster, but so full of life, so incredibly young and full of life and beautiful, that I just kept coming back. And I didn't, after about 3 or 4 years of this, I thought, I guess I better start doing something with this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm burying the lead here. I had done a documentary for HBO, the first one I did, which was on Sondheim. It's called 6 by Sondheim. And Sheila Nevins produced that. And she came to me to do it because I had no interest in actually doing it. But I had done a kind of docu-theater piece on him, and she thought it could be a documentary. And I said, well, I don't want to do what I did in the theater, but I would do something else. So that's what I did. So I went back to HBO after a year or so and said, I've been interviewing this woman. They knew who she was, and I think it'd be a great short. So they gave me, I don't know, $5,000 or something, if that, to have me, to get first dibs on it. But after 4 years, and I don't know, by then maybe 15 hours of footage, and I worked a little bit with my editor to start putting things together. And I thought, there's no way I can do this in 40 minutes, and so I finally went back to HBO, hoping they'd give me money to finish it, because most of the money was going to my editor. They weren't interested. So first of all, I pitched it as a series. I don't know why I did that, because the hard part of it was, how do you stitch this together? Because it's just me and a camera and her. And yet the story she's telling, she's repeating and telling over what turned out to be 5 years. So I keep cutting back to her. She's outside, she's inside, she's in a dress, she's into this, she's into that. To get the narrative right, I didn't have the images right to cut together. So it was, I realized the only way I could do this was, the last time shooting her was to be in the movie.
So talk about, so your editor is Mikey Wolf.
Mickey,
and
that's
Mickey, and I know she's listed as producer as well. Did that kind of come out of just because you collaborated so strongly with it, or was there more to it?
He did the 6 by Sondheim. He edited it, and
Okay.
don't remember how I met him. He was working at a commercial edit house, which did mostly commercials. And we just like had this instant connection. We're both from Ohio. He's a son of an Israeli woman. I don't know. And he came from musical theater. He studied musical theater before he became an editor. So that's, I latched on to him. It was very posh, I got to edit in these, studios. So when I did Rose, I immediately went to him and asked if he would do it, and he was totally game. And he had to squeeze it in between all of his, his job, professional edit job. And the sad news about it is he's no longer an editor. He moved into the theater in public. He works for an ad agency now and is executive there. So, but I just thought an incredible editor. And because he studied musical theater, he kind of had the same sensibility I did in terms of cutting.
So, given how strong a visual background you have, did you find a documentary that is largely what we call talking heads limiting in some way? What did you do to try and make it more cinematic, as it were?
Well, besides that last shoot, which helped pull the whole narrative together, I hired a friend of mine had a book coming out, and she had made these little videos to sell it. And I looked at, and I was talking to her, and she said, "You should talk to the person that made the little video. She just got out of school. She lives in Philadelphia, but I think she's incredibly talented." And I did think the stuff she did for my friend Honor was great. So I called her up and I said, "Would you ever be interested in doing graphics for a film? And I don't know you. Would you audition? I'll give you $300 and I'll tell you what I'm looking for." And we worked together, and she did all the title cards. So what we ended up doing with the movie is really thinking of it as chapters, and then having title cards before the chapters. And then she helped assemble the visual imagery as well throughout the movie and do graphic things. So there's movement in the movie, even though the interviews are so static. And Mickey also in his editing. We had, the great expense of the movie was, licensing all these images, millions of William Styron and a lot of Rose and a lot of historical things. So it's not really my dinner with Andre. It's, I think it has an energy to it, the movie, which is maybe the musical theater background. And I got a great composer. And I think my greatest, what helps me be good at what I do is because I have an incredibly short attention span. So I feel like I can sit through anything, probably anybody can sit through it. So I took all this conversation and somehow I hope made it interesting enough visually.
Did you have little small screenings, for groups just to try it, to see if it was working for them? By the way, let me just interject. Folks, we'll be taking questions from you guys. If anybody has a question for James or comment or whatever, use the raised hand function and we'll start calling on
you. No, is the answer to your questions. I didn't do any screening thing till I was kind of finished with the movie. I don't know why. I probably should have, but it was such a small personal labor of love. It wasn't like doing a film where you had to get responses and re-edit because of them. I didn't really care. It was just personal.
I just found it really interesting how your presence in the film and how you brought it full circle to your mother at the end.
Yeah, well, it was not my idea of fun, but I realized after 22 hours of footage, you know, I had a little conversation with myself. Like, why did you do this? You know, and I realized, well, that has to be part of the movie, is why somebody made it and why I spent all that time with her. So, yeah.
And why do you think that is in retrospect?
Well, just what I say at the end of the movie, I think I didn't have a mother like that, and I would love to have had a mother like that. And I don't know that her kids, you know, they have a different feeling about her, but uh, it was, she was the complete opposite of my mother, which I loved my mother, but you know, this is a woman who had privilege and money and education, and my mother was somebody who never went to college and grew up in the opposite, you know. So I just thought it was, she was fulfilling something for me, those conversations.
Hmm. What did you learn about yourself in that process?
Well, there's two sides of it. There's this sort of informational side, which I love, just learning about Bill Styron, who I was interested in, learning about Rose. I had grown up reading his books and I was curious about all of that. And I was curious why this woman was so popular and why she was so magnetic and why she looked so young. It's like, how do you get to be in your 80s and be that sharp and that adventuresome? So to that degree, I was fascinated by her. And I don't know, oh, I'm not sure I know what I learned for myself in it, other than I was able to share something with other people that I found fascinating.
Well, it's also a certain amount of personal self-revelation that you were able to disclose.
Well, I don't know that I ever had a discussion like that with a person that much older than me. You know, I mean, Sondheim and I obviously had a 19-year age spread, but this was, you know, this was a lot of years. This is several decades. And I was a history major in college. I love history. And this is a woman who I thought was like a zealot character. So I described it. She was always where the action was, an observer to history and standing slightly on the outside of it. And I just wanted to put her inside of it for all of us.
Yeah.
I probably haven't processed yet what I made of it for myself, but I'm sure I did. It's so funny because I'm writing a memoir now, and it's like I'm writing about plays, and I'm realizing now why I wrote them, you know, 30 years later. So,
Right.
so I have,
When,
if I live long enough, I'll figure out why I did this one.
um, I'll get to the question in a second. Stacey, you're up first, but it reminds me that you talk about how like you jump into so many of your projects without actually knowing why,
Yeah,
or and discovering it as you go.
it's a gut. I go by my gut, you know. I go by what interests me. I'm just lucky, you know. I grew up in the hippie days, you know. I never thought about making a living, as I said, and I just wanted to be around interesting people and do interesting things. And to that degree, I'm pretty happy.
Stacey, you're up.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, James. This has been great. I love especially the personal piece that you just referred to. But my question is about you. You said you pitched the documentary as a series rather than a standalone. And I've been advised to do that with them making a project about community policing in Boston. And apparently it's happening all over the country. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about the pros and cons. It's more work, but is it more marketable, or why you decided to do it that way?
Well, it's a great question because I realized, which I didn't till I did it, you know, I'm a dramatist. So I think the series as a art form has to have that kind of drama that drives you to keep tuning in every single episode. And it's that simple, because I watch a lot of TV, and a lot of it I don't get past the first or second episode of things. And I think it's because I don't know, I don't have a place to go to or where it's going. So, and in this kind of instance, it didn't make sense because there was nothing dramatic that I was driving towards. If there was if Rose was arrested, I'd start the series with that, and then, do 4 episodes and find out she was arrested because she can't drive or something,
Yeah.
But I think it's that simple. If you do a series, you have to have a dramatic through line that's going to drive it. I think in this day and age where people have so much to choose from in what they watch. But, if each episode has a kind of drama to it, and there's some kind of teaser to get you, if you get really invested in the characters or something, is probably a way to make it work. But in this instance, I didn't make it work.
Thank you.
I wish I'd given myself that advice before I tried to sell it that way.
Jim, you're up.
Yes, can you talk a little bit about your process of interviewing Rose? Did you have questions in mind? Did you have a story arc? Did you go in cold? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't have anything planned until the final interviews where we were together at the table. And that was very planned because I by then had assembled a movie and realized all the pieces I knew that were missing and that I needed to fill in. And also I needed to put myself in the movie. So, but in this instance, it doesn't mean that in the back of my head, I didn't have thoughts and questions. I just didn't bother bringing them in. And sometimes I would keep asking her the same thing every time I saw her because I never got a satisfactory answer. And I realized that was really good because, by the third time I brought it in, I could say, well, you said that, but really I don't understand. And, what do you mean by that? But I didn't do the preparation thing that I would imagine one would do in a doc, but
so typically you come in and just start chatting and you would take a direction.
Yeah, and what did you do this week? What did I do? There was a lot of me talking too, and that would lead to subjects, and then I put her in the car and I did a series of her with where she's reading her poetry in the movie. It was actually at Carly Simon's house, and we went to Carly's house because she's a pal, and we schmoozed with Carly. And then Carly said, I was just looking at your first book of poetry. She brought it out and showed us. And then I just said, Rose, let's go sit in her, little, where she has a little parabola or whatever you call it. And I said, pick a poem. She picked the first poem and she read it. And she read it so well for somebody who hadn't looked at it in, 40 years or whatever it was. And it was such a great poem about kind of infidelity. And so it was kind of like that. And there were other instances where the only interviews that you may have noticed in the movie are with her grandchildren. And that was just because they happened to be playing on the lawn and I had my camera and I said, come on, I want you to ask your grandmother one question, and so they're actually the only other people who were in the conversation.
James, you go into pretty deep detail with Rose about her marriage and the difficulties in her marriage, the infidelities and stuff. Did you show the film to Rose before it was finished? Did she have any input into it before it was finalized?
I didn't show it well, as far as I was concerned, I showed it to her when it was finished. She I wasn't going to not tell her if she had said something, but no, she said the most amazing thing after she watched it, and I had her watch it with an audience because I did not want her watching it alone. So we had an audience of 30 or 40 people. She said, well, it's a wonderful movie. I just wish it were about someone else. That's what she said. So, sorry, Rose, too late to get somebody else.
But if
ended up writing her kind of memoir. she started writing it after a couple of years because, well, you've asked me so many questions. It's brought back so much of my life, and I think I'm going to sit down and write a memoir now. So,
But if she had come up afterwards and said, you know, that thing I said about Bill, I don't want it in there, would you have taken it out?
I don't know. It would depend on what the thing was, but I have to tell you, there are a lot of things I knew about her and her marriage that I let her give forth. For instance, I was just reading her autobiography and discovered that she had come home a day early from one of her trips and discovered Bill in bed with one of her friends. You know, I mean, that would have been good in the movie, but she never brought it up for the movie. I guess she felt better bringing it up in the book. But so I did not want it to be that kind of movie. I was not digging for dirt and stuff. I just wanted it to be a conversation. So.
Right. Mitch, you're next.
Hi, James. Thank you so much for this. One of the great blessings and memories of my life was being at the PBS taping of Sunday in the Park with George back when, and sitting up front and experiencing that day of glory, having seen the show 3 times previously.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome. You know, my question is about visual imagination. When you brought Sunday in the Park with George to life, you had to find a way to imagine both Seurat and Sondheim's pointillism. And for us, I'm also a stage director and documentarian, and you know, finding visual correlations to the thing, to our subject, to our theme, to the essence of the cinema or the stage that we're creating is, of course, the core of what we do. And I'm just so interested process-wise, or if there is a process in your visual imagination, or if it just occurs, to bringing those elements to life, you know, in synchronicity with, you know, music or subject or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, it's funny, David Hockney came to see Sunday in the Park and he walked out at intermission because he didn't see the dots. He kept saying to anyone who would listen as he's walking about, where are the bloody dots, you know? And the set, it's very hard to do that in the theater because if you're sitting close, it's distracting. If you're sitting back, it's a different experience. And so we decided to only do the pointillism things in the painting itself and not in the set itself. So that was one of the things we decided. I mean, everything comes from the script. So it's really problem solving, first of all. How do I go from here to the studio, to this, to that, to this, to that? And then if you remember in the second act, there were those pop-ups that came up. So it's just a process that kind of, that evolves with a set designer from the writer's intention, actually. And the pointillism of it was dramatized because we saw him paint like this, and the song was about that. And to kind of make the set that just seemed repetitive and on the nose. So that's why we didn't do that. But I didn't want, you know, back in the day, in 1980, whatever, we didn't have all the technological things we have now. Except remember that crazy chromaloom thing in the second act, you know?
Of course.
It was very advanced for its time. But mostly when I work with designers, I want to know what they think, but I also want them to say, well, I've got to get from here to here to here, or we can only have 4 flymen on the floor, so I can't fly in all that stuff. Or they'll say, you can't fly that in because there's not enough room and you have to choose what you want to fly in. It actually kind of, when you get down to it, the mechanics of it really give you the structure of the design. And then from there, you kind of go with the visual effect.
What's interesting to me is how utterly cinematic that creation was. I mean, the way the way Surratt's painting comes to life does so in a very cinematic way in that production, and that so suggests to me why you took your journey into cinema as a result of that.
Yeah. Well, it's so different than movies because you have to guide the audience to what they see. And when you're going from A to B to C, you can't cut. There has to be something going on that you don't lose the audience's attention in when you're going, from the park to the studio or whatever. So, but I love that kind of stuff. I love doing that. I'm a problem solver, and Sondheim's such a puzzle guy. That was the fun part of figuring out how to solve these problems. And I'd write the problems, I'd say they're looking across the water at the bathers, and then I have to figure out, well, how am I going to do that? So it's kind of fun.
It's great. Thank you for all.
Sure,
it reminds me of way back when I was, thinking of making fiction films, and I took an acting class as a director, and was really going to a lot of plays and studying. And then I realized that transitions from scene to scene, are the mark of a really good director who knows how to get the actors in and out of a scene, to walk off stage while, move your eye somewhere, so that it's kind of a seamless transition.
I think photography helped me with that. I was really used to looking through a viewfinder in a 35 millimeter, confinement, and I love where the eye goes. The thing that really is crucial that never gets the credit deserves is lighting and lighting designers, because they're the ones that bring you over here while all of a sudden something's going off there, but you don't even realize it, and then you come back and you realize, you come back there, and then you realize this goes off, and before you know it, you're somewhere you didn't know you were going to be. It's kind of fun.
Well, it also applies in cinema. It's transitions of tone. Are also hugely important.
What's interesting about documentaries, I think, right? I mean, how you make those transition and time cuts and all of that, I think documentaries are fascinating in that regard. How you keep the viewer interested, and where do you tell the story with a talking head, and where do you tell the story by just showing images, and it's pretty great.
And as a writer, you're working with an editor. We talk about writing in the edit room, with documentaries, as opposed to scripting, a film. It's a very different.
You still got to get those moments when you're shooting them, because that's where you can't ever capture that kind of thing twice. So, it's kind of a lot of stress, I think, involved in that. I mean, it wasn't such a big deal because I knew I was going to be back next year on stuff, but whatever.
Right. But it's an important thing what you said about, having much of the film roughed out, by then you knew exactly what you needed for that final interview. I often say,
I needed narratively. I wouldn't say I knew what I needed visually, but I knew narratively.
Right.
And then I figured.
Right. Nicholas.
Hey, James. It's great hearing from you today. I got two questions for you. One, did you learn anything while making these docs that helped you communicate with people that aren't so familiar with theater? And I'll let you answer that one first.
Oh, well, I got to think about that.
And then the other question is has there been any films that you've seen that you feel really capture the emotions that happen while making theater? And if not, do you think there's what the hurdles are in kind of the translation?
Definitely the latter. Sure. I mean, people are fascinating. I almost have this theory you could do a documentary just about anybody and somehow make it interesting. Even what would be interesting if they're the most boring people in the world is doing an interesting documentary on. I don't think anybody is really that boring. I think a lot of people create personas for themselves, and what I like about documentaries that I like are when their real personages kind of emerge. Because when there's a camera on you, people are very self-aware of the camera and have a persona, and so I don't know, but I think to go back to your first question, I'm just work unconsciously, you know. I mean, and like I said, I have a short attention span, so if I'm shooting something that's boring, I either have to stir it up to make it not boring, or just shut off the camera and do something else. I don't know. I think it's a reflection of you. I think what I love about documentaries, they're truly a reflection of the people that make them. Because it's so their point of view. Movies are not like that because they're scripted. So if you're the director or whatever, you're telling a story that's already written. But the best documentaries are ones that peel away the layers, the artichokes, you know, and get to the heart of the matter of what passion brought you to make that documentary. So it's kind of fascinating. It's why I get why my wife has only made 2, because she has not found anything that so mystifies her or interests her. She doesn't really, you know, want to make it. There are other kinds of people who make documentaries, you know, 3 a year or 2 a year, and that's a different kind of documentary. So I don't know, is that helpful at all?
When you say you'll stir things up, because
Right.
it's, you know, can you give an example of things you might do to stir things up?
Oh, it's usually, well, because you know, I'm not probably like most of you. I haven't made that many documentaries, but I think it's about asking questions. I think it's asking questions of your subjects. You know, it's that simple. Making them go somewhere they either don't want to go or haven't thought of going, and trusting you. I would think if your subjects don't trust you, you're not going to have a very good documentary, because they're not going to let their guard down and they're not going to let you in. So, but you know, there are all kinds of documentaries. You may just be doing a documentary about you know, a state fair or something, you know, but still you've got to find that the people. And if the subject is about an event, it still has to come down to the people who make the event, who go to the event, who are there at the event, and also personal. Why are you telling the story? You know, I mean, if somebody's paying you to do it, that's a reason too. But I kind of feel like I jump into things not knowing why I'm doing them, and then I have to really wake up and decide. And some of them I drop. You know, I don't necessarily follow through on everything. So some of them I should have dropped. Let me tell you. There are a couple plays there that you know, I had every sign that it wasn't going to fly, but
Do you want to get into specifics?
No.
Name names?
No.
Okay. AK.
Thank you. This is a fascinating conversation on point with what I'm doing at the moment. I don't feel so bad about jumping into a project without fully understanding it now after hearing you guys.
Good. Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm like, should I really be doing this right now? And then, you know, it's amazing working with great creatives though. And sometimes these musicians and also theater directors, I've realized, can be very difficult to communicate with. And then you go and you see them in their element and they're freaking fascinating. I'm like, oh shit, this is great. I'm glad I'm here. So I'm in one of those moments where I love the idea of sort of seeing this historical experience brought to life, you know, through this kids' theater play, because instead of reading about history that will not be made in their textbooks or will be banned, way things are going, they can experience it through this play. And when I think about the set design, I'm like, I don't freaking have money for set design. So part of me has been really playing with the idea of doing a few scenes like live action and like on location, and then projecting them overhead during the theater play. I don't know if that's crazy or if you have any thoughts or advice around that.
You know, do it. Try one instance.
Mm-hmm.
if it works for you, you know. Translating theater to film is hard. And it's just a difficult thing to do, even talking about the Sunday in the Park taping. It's just hard to capture live theater. But I'm all for breaking rules. I mean, if it works, but you know, it just may go, well, this is an intimate thing I'm doing.
Right.
And once I open this door, then why aren't I doing more of it? And, you know, it's kind of, you have to figure out visually, artistically, what your language is. It's the kind of thing, if you do it once, it's going to be weird. If you do it so it's, and it tied together what the story is, it's interesting. Whether the kids go with you to where you shoot it, or I don't know, you know, or there's some discussion of that. But yeah, no idea is not worth pursuing. I mean, you know.
That's good. Thanks. That's good advice.
But it sounds like you have a problem because there's no set.
Well, I mean, it's just, you know, so what I wanted to do initially was start with an intro of the time period on when this story is from, so the audience gets into that mindset. I'm like, maybe if we do a, you know, montage of that time frame and set people in, like, okay, this is the late 60s civil rights era, this is what we're doing, and now we're going to zoom in into the perspective of the kids that has never really been explored. So then the kids sort of come on stage. Part of me was like, I should make this a live action film, but I've never directed actors and kids. And I'm like, well, the theater will help, because then the theater teacher can be there, you know, directing the actors, and I'm sort of pseudo directing.
Well, the thing, I think it's a good thing, because you can also, how old are these kids?
High school. One younger kid, like.
But they're going to have some opinions about what they're doing and a perspective on it, and that's, as will the audience. It sounds really interesting. I don't know whether the visual thing is such a problem, to tell you the truth. You know, cool. And by the way, you can make it a plus. You can do it in a rehearsal room and make it look like a rehearsal room, and, you know, rather than try to overproduce it, just underproduce it in a way, and then use archival, or then go on location, whatever. So it's not a mishmash, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I'm playing with that idea of whether much.
And by the way, costumes are really good. You know,
absolutely.
If you're talking about the 60s, you know, put some sideburns on some kids, or, you know.
Berets, yeah, I got that. That part's going to be
easy. Bottom pants. It'll bring people right back. We don't need the set, you know. We'll know.
I love this. Thanks, AK. We just got an example of how you collaborate with James Lapine. You know, it's wonderful. Francelle, final question, and then I'll wrap it up.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm curious. This kind of sets up my question well. Obviously, a lot of shows are becoming films, and films are becoming shows, and sometimes a straight play has a musical version, and vice versa. Do you have, I just watching them have not been able to figure out why so many musicals just don't work for me as film. There's something about the fourth wall that doesn't translate. And I know somebody right now who wrote something as a musical that I think would work very well as a film, but I'm a little nervous. I dare say it would be inappropriate as a musical. But I'm wondering, do you have a set of heuristics you've acquired over the years for being able to see where there's going to be a happy intersection, or is it just a blank slate every time?
No, it's not. I mean, first of all, when you sing, when you do a musical song, there's an expectation from the audience, but there has to be a reason why this person's singing.
Totally.
So often there's not. There's just people singing a song, you know, and certain shows have gotten away with it, you know, the Britney Spears, the shows that are jukebox that are based on other people's songs. But there just has to be a reason why people sing. And it is breaking the fourth wall. Singing in movies, I think, is particularly difficult. But when movie musicals work, they're fantastic, you know. But sometimes they don't translate. And vice versa. Sometimes movies are so often made into musicals in the theater, and it's just like, why did, you know, why? It worked as a movie because it was a movie. So why do you think by throwing songs in, it's going to suddenly work? And time again, these shows keep popping up. And sometimes they really are blockbusters, and sometimes they're just, they tank. But I would say the major question would be, why is this person singing? You know, and there has to be an answer, and usually it's because of some emotional thing. Are they confiding in it? Are they joyously, like La La Land, you know, in a world of their own making, that they can just break into song and dance, and then we come out of it and we realize that that's the fantasy of film, and that's the world we're in. It really takes some thought beforehand to really figure out how music, and musicals in particular, songs work.
Do you think you've discovered anything subconscious about like camera framing or anything that makes it work? Sometimes I've seen a movie where one song did work well and another was very cringy.
Yeah, it's probably because it was a cringy song.
No, it wasn't cringy. I'd seen the musical. None of it was cringy as a musical. It was just awful.
Well, because the scale of film is so different than the scale of theater. You know, when you're singing a song, you're seeing a real person scale to, you know, and you're already dealing with magic in the theater because it's you and that other person together in a room. In a movie, there's no relationship. It's a different relationship when somebody's, it's not like they're breaking into song the way they do in an orchestra picks up, and, you know, you're all there and you know what the language of it is. And by the way, they're hard to do too. I don't know. I think if something's cringeworthy, just cut it. It's just like, you know, people think, oh, well, I have to have 7 songs. We'll have 6. You know, nobody's going to counting, but they're going to be bored, you know, or it's not working. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's tricky.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, James.
I don't know what else to say. There's also songs that are written for movies, and they work much better than songs that have been written for something else or for were on the stage. That they work well on the stage, but doesn't mean necessarily they translate to film.
Yeah, I particularly, I don't know why the movie Cabaret is coming to mind as a great example of movie musicals, but
well, that's also because it's in a cabaret. You know?
Right.
You know,
it's motivated. Those songs are motivated. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a kind of stylistic thing that is very natural. And it was a really good movie and really well made.
Yeah. We need to wrap it up. So one last question, which is, you know, we talked about the art of making art. Are there any kind of last, you know, observations or advice you have about art making, particularly in terms of documentary? You know, where, you know, so much of it is people get into documentary filmmaking because they have something to say or something about the world they want to change. It's mission driven.
Right.
And I, you know, I'm a big advocate for the art of documentary, and documentary is a cinematic form. So I'm just curious if there's any advice for those who might want to make just really great artful documentaries.
Well, I don't know that the two are necessarily inseparable. I mean, you can have an artful film that has a lot to say about something, and you can have an artful film that's artful. I just always come back to passion. You know, it's often not so much what's up here, but what's in your heart. You know, and if somebody makes something and they're passionate about it, that comes through in the work. And if they make it because it's workmanlike, and that's a different you know, that generally has a different kind of feel to it. I mean, there are documentaries everywhere, and TV and news and whatnot, you know, and some of them are very dry and not artistic, and some of them are beautifully rendered. But I think it takes a lot of time to do what we all do, and you got to be doing it because you have a passion to do it, and it's a subject you have to do it, you know, unless somebody's paying you money, and then that's a job, and that's another kind of, you want to make a living too. So it's a hard marriage, but I'm sorry, I don't have much more to say than that.
Well, so says the man who directed a play called Passion with Mr. Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah, well, I think we're living in a sadly passionless world. I mean, it's a tough world we're living in right now, and compassion is rare to come by. And I don't know. I feel I always feel when I see something that when somebody has really poured their heart in it, it always touches my heart. So I feel.
Well, you've touched our hearts today, James. I mean, really, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm very flattered by that. And best of luck with everything that you do, you know. But it's Sondheim, right? Let it come from you, then it will be new. You know, anything you do, let it come from you, then it will be new. I think that's a good way to go.